We are all accustomed to hearing that after the cessation of mortal existence, a wonderful world of afterlife opens up before a person, but in fact, everything is not as rosy as we would like. There is something that many people prefer not to talk about, deliberately keeping silent about some shocking facts and realities that may await us on the other side of biological existence. Watch this video to the end, and you will find out what spine-tingling revelations were shared by those who visited beyond our world, and why some people return to life screaming in horror. Many doctors, constantly faced with the death of patients, are forced to become cynical and averse to sentimentality. Seeing people die every day, they get used to believing that there is only emptiness on the other side of death, and therefore, when asked what, in their opinion, happens to someone who leaves this world, they often answer, absolutely nothing, he just becomes flower fertilizer. Once upon a time, resuscitator Rawling Smoretz also held the same opinion. Doctor of Medical Sciences, President of the Tennessee Institute of Cardiology, former personal physician of American President Eisenhower. For almost 20 years he was engaged in a noble cause, bringing people back from the other world, and for a long time he was not at all interested in the question of what happens to them on the other side of life. In principle, he did not believe in any afterlife. But everything changed after one incident, which radically changed not only his worldview, but also completely changed the direction of his chosen career. Having forced me to closely study what is called post-mortem experience, and that was the case. A middle-aged patient whose heart stopped was admitted to the intensive care unit, and at first everything happened according to the scheme already familiar to the doctor. He began to take the necessary measures to save this man. At that time, it was routine work for him, but Rawling wrote down the following about what happened next. After carrying out all the actions appropriate for such a case, the patient finally regained consciousness, but looked extremely frightened. He was trembling with horror, and kept repeating this. "Doctor, don't let me go back there again." And if the patient had not been so weakened, he would probably have screamed in fear. It was the first time I saw such a frightened person after he had been on the other side of life. Usually people after resuscitation are either confused, too exhausted, or grateful for salvation, but this was the first time I saw such panic in a patient. Such a reaction to the resurrection from the dead greatly puzzled the cardiologist, and he, consumed by curiosity, could not stand it and asked what caused such a violent reaction in him. The patient explained that after his death he ended up in some kind of pit, where it was dark and unbearably lonely. The man could not finish his story, because he again began to shake with fear, he was sweating, and again asked the doctor not to allow him to return to that terrible place again. And yet, even to such an emotional response, the cardiologist, who has seen everything, at first did not attach much importance. He considered it just a strange reaction to stress. After all, the person experienced clinical death. And, probably, it would all have ended there. But a few days later, Rawling again visited the patient he had recently saved. This should have been done to monitor his health. And then he once again tried to ask about those frightening knowledge. But imagine the doctor's surprise when he answered quite sincerely that he didn't remember anything like that. "Excuse me, doctor, but what are you talking about? I don't remember anything that could have scared me. On the contrary, I met there an amazing and kind woman of about 20 years old, very beautiful and sweet. She introduced herself as my mother. But that's not true. My real mother looks completely different." After this answer, Rawling was even more puzzled. Not only did his resurrected patient now renounce his terrible visions, but he also spoke about new ones. The resuscitator realized that he would not calm down until he figured out something about the matter. Without informing the patient, he contacted his father and told him about his son's visions. He also retold the data and descriptions of the woman that he met in the other world. The father's comments literally stunned the cardiologist, making me wonder for the third time what was happening. It turns out that the father of the saved man was married twice. But, unfortunately, his first wife died. Not wanting to traumatize his son's psyche, he never decided to tell him about it. Moreover, he soon married a second time. But the fact is that it was his first wife who was the biological matter of his son, which he not only had never heard of, but had never seen a photograph of her. In general, the cardiologist's patient in vain doubted the truth of the words of the woman who met him beyond the line separating life from death. This incident made an indelible impression on Rowling, making you really think about what really happens after a person dies. Since then, he began to interview patients in detail about what they experienced at the moment when doctors fought for their lives. Thanks to this research, the doctor came to the conclusion that there is another life beyond death. But unlike similar studies that contain exclusively positive memories of immortal life, Rowling also collected testimonies from patients that cannot in any way be classified as pleasant memories. On the contrary, they frighten and force us to view the post-mortem experience more critically, forcing us to remember even the hellish torments of sinners in the afterlife. He came to the conclusion that after the cessation of mortal existence, not all people will experience something pleasant after death. There will be retribution for sinners. There is no doubt about this. Rowling conducted countless surveys and experiments, about which he said the following. I interviewed all the resuscitated patients, but only about 20% of them agreed to talk about their impressions from the otherworldly sphere. These descriptions freed me from the darkness of ignorance and skepticism. They led me to the conviction that there is another life beyond death. I have repeatedly witnessed that the dead can see and hear doctors in the ward, but this is easy to check. There is no doubt that they really perceive everything around them when the beating of life in their body stops. So it is living people who suffer, some from spiritual blindness to the invisible world, while the perceptions of the so-called dead, on the contrary, expand. The doctor also made an interesting observation. It turns out that if you ask a patient immediately after resuscitation, you can often hear from him just about the frightening experience of death, about the unpleasant transition to another world. According to the cardiologist, over time, such disturbing and painful experiences are expelled into the subconscious, and either only pleasant memories are deposited in the conscious memory, or nothing remains at all. This is why at first glance it may seem that life after death is somewhat reminiscent of heaven, but in reality this is not always the case. According to the stories of those who experienced clinical death and were saved from leaving for the spiritual realms, it usually begins with the deceased seeing their own body from which life has left. At the same time, he is able to hear and see everything that happens around him. Then the soul leaves the place of death, flying into a dark corridor, but not everyone's flight through this tunnel ends in light. Quite a few of them said that they found themselves in a dark cave, or at the bottom of a deep hole, where it was cold and gloomy. Everything there is shrouded in fog, and the people living in those areas resemble shadows, from which they already smell doom, emptiness, apathy, and hopelessness reign in that place. Some even admitted that they made attempts to escape from those places, but they felt a certain heavy burden on themselves, which, like a large stone, did not allow them to leave this abode of darkness. They very quickly came to understand that the burden holding the soul in the dark sphere was their own sins. They do not allow her to soar into the bright areas of the other world. The weight of sins literally presses on a person, preventing him from leaving hell. Naturally, few who have experienced such a frightening experience will share it with others. After all, he tells a very unpleasant truth about them, so they not only hide it from other people, but often from themselves, pushing out terrifying memories from their consciousness. This is why the testimony that patients share immediately after being resurrected from the dead is so important, while they still do not have time to fully comprehend what happened and put up a psychological defense against it. At the end of his life, Rowling spoke. Throughout human history, mystics have spoken of the existence of life after death, but only now, thanks to modern resuscitation technology, are we truly beginning to penetrate this great mystery. And perhaps existence after death is not only a mystery, but also the hope of humanity. The unusual encounters that my patients experienced had the most profound impact on them, and changed their attitude towards life and what would come after it. I have not met a single patient who, having experienced this, remained an atheist. As in any similar example, everyone has the right to choose what to believe in and what not. But if this is true, then some of us would do well to think carefully about our actions, and before it is too late to correct those of them that can carry the soul into the terrible regions of the afterlife. Write in the comments what you think about this, and also like and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new interesting videos on various mystical topics. Thank you very much for watching. Good luck, and good luck to everyone.